This is the site of England's greatest historical mystery. 500 years ago, the two young brothers, King Edward V and Richard, Duke of York, were brought here to the royal apartments by their uncle to prepare for Edward's coronation. The boys were seen playing in the garden near to this building, the Bloody Tower, or the Garden Tower, as it was then called. Edward's coronation never took place, but their uncle, who bore the same name and title as myself, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was crowned instead. The young princes disappeared from public view. According to the official history of the Tudors and of Shakespeare, they'd been murdered by their wicked, grasping uncle. But historical research reveals that the story is much more complicated than this simple explanation. The hunchback monster that Shakespeare created provides wonderful drama. As history, it leaves a great deal to be desired. 1984 is not only the 500th anniversary of these events, it is also, because of George Orwell, the symbol of the state's potential for control of information, to alter not only the present and the future, but also the past. Is this what the Tudors did to Richard III? Or was he truly a man so corrupted by the pursuit of power that he murdered the nephews he'd promised to support? This program endeavors to examine this mystery, to penetrate the complications of the historical records, to examine the assumptions, the prejudices, and the beliefs of certain eminent historians, by using the same techniques and methods practiced by the best legal brains in our courts. They have the unenviable task of pursuing the possibilities and probabilities of events in a different age to our own. The witnesses dead and buried, except for their written records. The motives of the authors open to question at every turn. What you are about to see is an attempt to examine objectively the evidence on both sides. Presided over by the distinguished former Lord Chancellor, Lord Elwyn Jones, two eminent QCs will marshal historians and other experts to present the case for and against the King. A jury of 12 men and women will attempt to decide on the guilt or innocence of King Richard III. It should be a fascinating experience. They do so in the knowledge that whatever the outcome, the cells in the tower will remain empty tonight. 500 years ago, the outcome would have been rather different, not only for the accused, but maybe also the witnesses and jury themselves.
Court will rise. The charge is that King Richard III did, in or about the month of August 1483, in the Tower of London, murder Prince Edward, Prince of Wales, and Prince Richard, Duke of York.
Mr. Dillon, I understand that you represent King Richard III in these proceedings.
Lord, I do.
In view of his inescapable absence, what is your plea on his behalf?
Lord, the plea is one of not guilty.
Members of the jury, in these proceedings, you will be invited to deliver your verdict on a matter which has been the subject of fierce controversy and dispute for over 500 years. It is whether or not King Richard III was responsible for the alleged murder in the Tower of London of the two young princes, Prince Edward and Prince Richard. King Richard himself was killed on the battlefield of Bosworth in 1485. He is beyond the power and jurisdiction of this or indeed any other human court. What you are invited to do today in these proceedings is to pass a historical judgment upon him. He stands, in a sense, indicted at the bar of history. The charge against him, as you've just heard, is one of the gravest charges in the calendar of crime, murder. We will, as far as practicable, follow the form of an ordinary criminal trial. However, as the potential witnesses to the events of the year 1483 are long dead, the strict rules of evidence obviously cannot be complied with. You will therefore, in due course, be asked to decide this matter on the basis of probabilities. Is it probable that King Richard murdered the princes or not? May I ask counsel whether that approach to the case is agreed by both?
Lord, it is.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Then, Mr. Russell, do you open the case for the Crown?
Yes, may it please your lordship. Members of the jury, in this case I appear for the prosecution together with my learned friend Mr. Godfrey. And as you appreciate, my learned friend Mr. Dillon appears for the defendant together with Mr. Lott. Members of the jury, in 1483, 500 years ago last April, King Edward IV died, leaving two young sons, the princes, aged 12 and 10. The elder was proclaimed King Edward V, but he never lived to wear that crown. On his way to London to mount the throne, he was taken by his uncle, Richard of Gloucester, this defendant, and incarcerated in the Tower of London, later to be joined, in circumstances which you will hear, by his younger brother, Prince Richard. Within weeks, the defendant had seized the throne for himself, and the young boys, the rightful heirs, shortly afterwards disappeared, never to be seen again. 200 years later, in 1664, their bones were found buried deep within the precincts of the Tower of London and removed to Westminster Abbey, where they lie to this day. The prosecution alleged that whatever the manner of their deaths, whoever actually caused them, they were murdered on the instructions of this defendant, innocent pawns, in a power game which Richard had to win to survive. Now, members of the jury, before I come in the barest outline to the evidence in this case, let me start by setting the historical scene, which I think is necessary. And hopefully you have in front of you a genealogical tree of the houses of Lancaster and York at this time. Your lordship has it?
Yes, and it's in the blue fold.
Thank you. Members of the jury, in the 15th century, England was torn apart by the Wars of the Roses, a civil war between the rival houses of Lancaster and York. Both houses descended from Edward III. And if you look at that tree, you'll see Edward III at the top, and in the centre, you'll find Richard, Duke of York. And you will see that he had three children. Edward, to become Edward IV and succeed Henry VI, George, Duke of Clarence, and Richard, Duke of Gloucester, to become Richard III, this defendant.